He once ignored his dog, and someone paid the price. So when the same instinct came back years later, he knew this wasn't just a warning, a quiet lake, a hidden tunnel, and a truth powerful enough to be erased. But his German shepherd heard it first, something moving beneath the surface. And this time, walking away might cost more than just his past, because some sounds aren't meant to scare you, they're meant to wake you up. What would you do if your dog knew the truth before you did? Share your thoughts and don't forget to like and subscribe to support more powerful stories. Silas Creed had learned, a long time ago, that silence wasn't the same thing as peace. At 39, he carried himself like a man who had spent too many years moving through danger without hesitation and not enough time learning how to stop. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his frame lean and hardened rather than bulky, muscle built for endurance, not display. His face was clean-shaven, exposing a square jaw and sharp cheekbones that gave him a permanently focused expression. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, as if he had allowed himself just enough distance from the past without fully letting it go. His skin, naturally light, had been weathered by years of harsh environments, now faintly tanned and roughened by cold northern wind. But it was his eyes that lingered, gray-blue, steady, and heavy with something he didn't talk about. Silas didn't come to northern Wisconsin to start over. He came because there was nowhere else left to go. The road into Alder Bay curved along the edge of a vast lake that stretched out like polished steel beneath the early summer sun. Pine trees lined the roadside, tall and unmoving, their shadows cutting across the gravel in long, dark strokes. The air smelled clean, sap, water, distant earth, but it felt too quiet, not empty, just waiting. In the passenger seat sat Valor. The German shepherd filled the space like a coiled presence, not restless, not relaxed. His coat was a deep black along the spine, fading into warm gold across his chest and legs, thick but practical, fur-shaped by work, not comfort. His ears stood upright, constantly adjusting to the smallest sounds, and his eyes, dark brown, alert, never lingered in one place for long. Valor was 4 years old enough to be experienced, young enough to still trust instinct without hesitation. Unlike Silas, they didn't need to speak. They rarely did. Silas slowed the truck as the dirt road narrowed, the trees pressing closer on both sides until the lake disappeared behind them. The property came into view all at once, a clearing carved out of the forest, uneven and quiet, with a small house sitting near the shoreline and a weathered boathouse leaning slightly toward the water, like it had been waiting too long for something that never returned. Silas parked the engine and sat still for a moment. No birds, no wind, no distant sound of other people, just the faint lapping of water against wood somewhere out of sight. He exhaled slowly, his hands resting on the steering wheel longer than necessary. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "This'll do." He stepped out first. Gravel shifted under his boots, loud in the silence. Valor followed a second later, landing lightly, immediately lowering his head, not submissive but focused, reading the ground like a map written in scent. The property wasn't abandoned in the way people expected. It wasn't destroyed or overgrown beyond recognition. It was paused, like something had interrupted its life and never allowed it to resume. The house itself was simple, aged wood, slightly faded, but structurally sound. The porch creaked under Silas's weight as he stepped up. The front door opened with a stiff groan. Inside smelled like old wood and cold air. No rot, no mold, just time. "Not bad," Silas said quietly, more out of habit than optimism. Behind him, Valor didn't follow. Silas turned. The dog stood at the edge of the clearing, facing the lake, but he wasn't looking at it. His body was still, too still. His ears angled forward, not reacting to movement, but to something deeper, listening. Silas watched him for a second. "Hey." No response. Valor's head tilted slightly, just enough to suggest he was tracking something Silas couldn't hear. Then, without warning, the dog moved, fast. Valor sprinted across the clearing toward the boathouse, his paws kicking up dirt and dry pine needles. Silas swore under his breath and followed, boots hitting the ground harder than necessary. "Valor!" The boathouse door was already partially open. Valor slipped inside without hesitation. Silas reached it seconds later and pushed the door wide. The interior was dim, filtered sunlight breaking through cracks in the wood. The smell of water lingered, cold, metallic, faintly stale. The floorboards were uneven but intact. Valor was in the center of the room, digging, not like a dog chasing scent, not random, controlled, focused. His claws struck the wood in sharp, repetitive bursts, each movement deliberate, almost urgent. "Hey!" Silas grabbed the dog by the collar and pulled him back. Valor resisted, not violently but with weight. He didn't want to leave. Silas frowned. "What is it?" Valor stopped struggling but didn't relax. His gaze remained locked on the exact spot he had been clawing at. Silas followed the line of sight. Nothing, just old wood. He stepped forward and pressed his boot against the floorboard. It creaked slightly under pressure, but not unusually, so no hollow echo, no immediate sign of anything beneath. "Probably something dead under there," Silas muttered. Valor made a low sound, not quite a growl. Silas didn't like that, but he let it go, for now. Inside the house again, the light had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the walls. Silas moved through the rooms methodically, checking windows, testing doors, mapping the space in his head the way he always did. Kitchen, living area, small bedroom, narrow hallway. Everything simple, predictable. Until he reached the back door, something caught his eye. He stepped closer. There, scratched into the wood, rough, uneven, done with something sharp but not precise, was a line of text. Not old enough to fade completely, not new enough to feel fresh. Silas leaned in slightly. "Don't let it hear the third knock." He stared at it. No signature, no explanation, just the sentence. Behind him, Valor entered the house slowly this time. He didn't look at Silas. He didn't look at the writing. He stood in the middle of the room and turned his head slightly toward the floor, listening again. It happened just after midnight. Silas wasn't asleep. He rarely was on the first night anywhere. The house had settled into that deep, unnatural quiet where every small sound felt amplified. Wood shifting, distant water, the faint hum of something unseen. Valor lay near the door, not sleeping, just watching. Then, a sound. Soft, deliberate. Knock. Silas's eyes opened instantly. He didn't move. Another. Knock. Not from the door. Not from the wall. From below. From under the house. Silas sat up slowly. Valor was already standing. Every muscle in the dog's body was tight, ears forward, eyes fixed on a single point in the floor. Waiting. The third knock didn't come, and somehow that made it worse. Silas swung his legs off the bed and stood. The air felt colder now, not physically, not exactly, but something had shifted. He stepped into the hallway, each movement controlled, quiet. Valor moved beside him without command, matching pace. They stopped near the center of the house. The sound didn't repeat. Silas crouched slightly, placing his hand flat against the floor. Nothing. No vibration, no heat, no sign of movement, just stillness. He stayed there longer than necessary, waiting, nothing. Silas exhaled and stood again. "Old pipes," he said under his breath. It didn't sound convincing. Valor didn't react. The dog's gaze remained locked downward, unblinking. Silas watched him for a moment, then shook his head. Not tonight. He turned away, heading back toward the bedroom. Valor didn't follow immediately. Silas paused at the doorway and looked back. The dog was still there. Still staring at the same spot. As if whatever had made that sound hadn't left. Silas didn't call him again. He just stood there for a second longer, something tight settling in his chest. Familiar, unwelcome. The kind of feeling he hadn't had since deployment, the kind that came right before something went wrong. He stepped into the room and lay down again, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the lake remained perfectly calm. Inside, the house said nothing more. But Valor didn't sleep. Not that night, not even once. Morning came slowly to Alder Bay, the kind of morning that made everything look clean enough to forgive the past. Sunlight stretched across the lake in long silver bands, catching the ripples just enough to turn them into something almost beautiful. The air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, softened by warmth, and somewhere in the distance a boat engine hummed low and steady. It should have felt peaceful, but to Silas Creed it felt staged, like a place that had learned how to look safe without actually being safe. He stood on the porch for a while, boots planted against the worn wood, arms crossed loosely over his chest. His gray-blue eyes moved slowly across the property, not searching, not exactly, just measuring. Behind him, inside the house, Valor hadn't moved far from the hallway. The dog stood near the same section of floor as the night before, head lowered slightly, ears forward. Not tense enough to attack, not relaxed enough to rest, listening. Silas exhaled quietly. "Yeah," he muttered. "I hear it too." But he didn't. That was the problem. The drive into town took just under 20 minutes. Alder Bay revealed itself in fragments through the trees, first a dock, then a row of small buildings, then a narrow street that ran parallel to the water. It wasn't large enough to feel like a town, but it wasn't empty either. People moved here. They just didn't rush. Silas parked near a general store with a hand-painted sign swinging slightly in the breeze. The bell above the door chimed when he entered. Warm air greeted him, along with the smell of coffee and old wood. Inside, the store was lined with shelves of supplies, tools, canned goods, fishing equipment, things people needed to keep life moving without drawing attention to it. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, Eleanor Voss. She was shorter than Silas expected, barely reaching his shoulder, with a thin frame that made her look fragile at first glance. But her posture told a different story, straight-backed, controlled, like someone who had learned long ago that showing weakness invited questions she didn't want to answer. Her hair was silver, pulled into a loose knot at the base of her neck. Her skin was pale but not soft, lined in a way that suggested not just age but years spent thinking too much about things that never quite resolved. Her eyes were sharp, a muted gray that seemed to study people rather than welcome them. She looked up when Silas entered, not surprised. That was the first thing he noticed. "Morning," she said, voice calm but measured. Silas nodded once. "Morning." Her gaze flicked briefly to Valor, who had stepped in behind him, paws quiet against the wooden floor. The dog moved differently here, slower, more deliberate, as if the air itself required more attention. Eleanor watched him for a second longer than necessary. "That your dog?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded once. "Military?" Silas didn't answer right away, then, "Used to be." Eleanor's lips pressed together slightly. She turned away, reaching for a coffee mug behind the counter, but her voice shifted, lower now. "You bought the house by the lake." It wasn't a question. Silas leaned one shoulder lightly against a shelf. "That obvious?" "Nothing much changes around here," she said. "So when something does, people notice." Silas studied her. "You always greet strangers like that?" Eleanor gave a faint, humorless smile. "Only the ones who move into that property." Silas didn't smile back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "There's something wrong with it." Eleanor's hand stopped mid-motion. Not dramatically, just enough. "What kind of wrong?" she asked. Silas glanced toward Valor. The dog had moved a few steps deeper into the store, nose low, scanning, not excited, not distracted, just working. "Sound," Silas said. "Under the house." Eleanor turned slowly, her eyes sharpened. "And the dog?" she asked. Silas met her gaze. "What about him?" Her voice dropped. "Does he react before you hear it, or after?" Silas didn't hesitate. "Before." Eleanor went very still, the kind of stillness that wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then she set the mug down. "Come around the counter," she said quietly. Silas didn't move at first. Then he pushed off the shelf and stepped closer. Valor followed immediately, positioning himself slightly ahead of Silas, body angled, not aggressive, but ready. Eleanor noticed. "Good dog," she murmured. Then, almost to herself, "Too good." She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not new, not old enough to fall apart either, something in between. She didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, she looked at Silas again. "You ever hear the name Noah Wren?" Silas shook his head once. "Should I have?" Eleanor exhaled slowly. "He lived in your house," she said. "About 11 years ago." Silas said nothing. "He wasn't from here," she continued. "Worked search and recovery on the lake, diver, quiet man, kept to himself." Her eyes flicked briefly to Valor. "Had a dog, German Shepherd. Name was Bishop." Silas felt something tighten slightly in his chest. "What happened to him?" Eleanor's jaw shifted. "Officially?" she said. "Drowned." Silas waited. "And unofficially?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned closer, lowering her voice even further. "The night before he disappeared, he came in here." She tapped the counter lightly. "Right where you're standing." Silas didn't move. "He was soaked," she said, "shaking, not from cold." Her eyes grew distant, replaying something she clearly hadn't forgotten. "He kept saying one thing, over and over." Silas leaned in slightly. "What?" Eleanor swallowed. "It's not staying down there." A pause. "It's coming up with the water." Silas frowned. "What is?" Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time, she hesitated. Before she could answer, something changed, not in the room, in Valor. The dog froze, completely. His head lifted slightly, ears angling toward the far wall. Not the door, not the street outside. Inside the building. His gaze locked onto a tall mirror leaning against a shelf. Silas followed the line instinctively. The mirror reflected the store interior, shelves, doorway, sunlight cutting through the front windows, and behind Silas, for just a fraction of a second, a shape moved, not clear enough to define, not solid enough to confirm, just motion. Silas turned instantly. Nothing. Empty space. The bell above the door hadn't rung. No footsteps. No sound. When he looked back at the mirror, nothing was there, but Valor hadn't relaxed. He took one slow step forward and growled, low, controlled, directed at something that shouldn't have been there. Silas felt it again. That same pressure in his chest from the night before, the kind that didn't come from fear, it came from recognition. He turned back to Eleanor. "You were saying," he said quietly. Eleanor was watching Valor now, not Silas, the dog. Her expression had changed. There was no confusion in it, no doubt, just something colder. "You need to leave that place," she said. Silas didn't react. "Why?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Because whatever Noah found, he didn't get the chance to explain it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're going to get," she said, sharper now. Silas leaned in slightly. "You knew him." Eleanor didn't deny it. "You saw him that night." Silas's voice dropped. "And you didn't tell anyone." Her eyes hardened. "You think anyone would have listened?" she asked. Silas held her gaze. "Try me." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, then finally, quietly, "There's a foundation," she said. "Halcyon Reach." Silas didn't react outwardly, but he remembered the name. "They fund everything here," she continued. "Harbor repairs, school programs, medical supplies," she paused. "And anything that needs to disappear quietly." Silas's eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that have to do with my house?" Eleanor didn't answer directly. Instead, she slid the folded paper across the counter. Silas opened it, a rough map, the lake, the shoreline, and several marked points, including his property. His jaw tightened slightly. Who made this? Eleanor met his eyes. Noah. Silas looked back down at it. The markings weren't random. They were measured, deliberate, like tracking something that moved, slowly, underwater. Silas folded the paper again. Why give this to me? Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because your dog reacted before you heard it. Silas looked up. And that means? Eleanor didn't hesitate this time. It means you still have time. A long pause. Time for what? Eleanor stepped back, putting distance between them. Don't wait for the third sound, she said. The drive back felt longer. The sunlight hadn't changed. The lake was still calm, but something inside Silas had shifted. Valor didn't sit this time. He stood in the passenger seat watching the road behind them. Not ahead, behind, Silas noticed. He didn't comment. When they reached the property, the first thing Silas saw was the back door, slightly open, just enough to notice. He stopped the truck, didn't move. Valor growled softly. Silas reached for the door handle, then paused, looked at the house, at the quiet, at the stillness. Then stepped out, slowly, carefully. He approached the door, pushed it open. Inside. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken glass, no forced entry, no missing items. Just the same still air, the same silence, but something was different. Silas stepped inside. Valor followed, this time immediately. The dog moved past him, straight to the hallway, straight to the same spot, and stopped. His head lowered, his ears forward, listening. Silas stood behind him, waiting. The house said nothing, for a moment. Then, from beneath the floor, a single faint sound. Not loud, not clear, but enough. Silas closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, then opened them again, and this time, he didn't tell himself it was nothing. Silas didn't wait for daylight. He stood in the doorway of the house for a long moment, staring at the hallway where Valor had stopped. The dog remained there, still as stone, eyes fixed on the same section of floor, as if the boards themselves had started breathing. The air inside felt wrong now, not colder, just occupied. Silas turned without a word and stepped back outside. Valor followed instantly this time, no hesitation. The boathouse stood where it had the day before, leaning slightly toward the lake, weathered boards grayed by years of water and wind. But now that Silas knew something lay beneath it, the entire structure felt different. Not abandoned, repurposed. He pushed the door open again. The hinges groaned softly. Inside, the smell of damp wood and cold metal was stronger than before. Valor didn't rush in this time. He walked, slow, measured, every step placed with intention. Silas closed the door behind them, shutting out the sunlight. The interior dimmed, shadows stretching across the floorboards. "Show me," Silas muttered. Valor didn't look back. He moved straight to the same spot as before, then stopped, lowered his head, waited. Silas stepped forward and crouched beside him. He ran his fingers along the wood, pressing down, feeling for inconsistencies. At first, nothing. Then, a difference. Not hollow exactly, but not solid either. Subtle. Enough. Silas stood, grabbed a crowbar from the wall, left there by someone who had either planned to return or never had the chance. He wedged it between two boards and applied pressure. The wood resisted, then cracked. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Silas paused, listened. Nothing answered. He tried again. This time the board lifted. Beneath it, darkness, not dirt, not insulation, a space. He removed another board, then another, until a narrow opening revealed itself beneath the floor, a shaft, concrete-lined, man-made. Silas stared at it for several seconds, then looked at Valor. The dog was already staring back, no fear, just readiness. "Yeah," Silas said quietly. The descent was tight, too tight for comfort. Silas lowered himself down carefully, boots finding a narrow ledge before dropping onto solid ground. The air below was colder, carrying a metallic edge that didn't belong to natural earth. Valor jumped down beside him, landing silently. The beam of Silas's flashlight cut through the darkness. Concrete walls, a narrow corridor extending forward, low ceiling reinforced with steel brackets. Not new, but not ancient either, and most importantly, maintained. Silas moved slowly, every step deliberate. The corridor sloped slightly downward, leading toward the direction of the lake. Along the walls, he saw what he expected and what he didn't. Old piping, rusting brackets, and then newer elements, scratches in the concrete, marks on the floor, fresh. Someone had been here, recently. Valor moved ahead, nose low, tracing the path with quiet intensity. He paused once, briefly, near a section of wall where a series of thin metal tubes ran upward. Silas followed his gaze. The tubes connected to thicker pipes overhead. He reached out and tapped one lightly. A faint vibration echoed through it. He stilled, then understood. Not guesswork, recognition. The sound, he murmured. He tapped again. The vibration traveled, faint but distinct, carried, amplified. Silas exhaled slowly. That's how it works. The pipes, the anchors, the structure. When something moved out in the water, large enough, close enough, it sent vibration through the anchored system, up through the pipes, into the floor above. Not random, not supernatural, mechanical, controlled, which meant someone designed it. The corridor widened slightly ahead. Valor slowed, his body lowered a fraction, alert. Silas raised the flashlight. The beam caught something. A steel panel embedded into the wall, different from the surrounding concrete, cleaner, newer, scratches along the edges, not part of the original structure, added later. Silas approached carefully. Kneeling, he ran his fingers along the seam. It wasn't sealed permanently, just fitted, hidden. He wedged the crowbar into the edge, applied pressure. The panel resisted, then shifted, a soft metallic pop. Silas pulled it open. Inside, a compartment, small but deliberate, contained. He reached in, pulled out the first object, a waterproof recorder, compact, military-grade, not civilian equipment. Next, a notebook, edges worn, pages thick, resistant to moisture, and finally, a small device, circular, with a faintly scratched casing. Silas turned it in his hand, a low-frequency transmitter, old design, but functional. Valor let out a quiet sound, not fear, recognition. Silas looked at the recorder, pressed play, static, then a voice, male, rough, controlled but strained. "This is Noah Wren. If anyone finds this—" A pause, breathing. "They're not using it the way it was built." Silas leaned closer. "They're moving things, not through the docks, not through the roads." Another pause. "They're using the lake." The recording crackled. "If your dog reacts before you hear anything—" A sharp noise interrupted. Metal. Impact. Then, "You're already—" Silence. The recording cut. Silas didn't move for several seconds. He didn't need more. He already knew enough. He slipped the recorder into his pocket, closed the compartment, replaced the panel loosely, not sealed, not yet. Valor had moved again, further down the corridor, toward the end. Silas followed. The passage narrowed again before opening into a small chamber, not large but functional. There were rails along the floor, lightweight, used to move something, cargo. The wall opposite the entrance showed signs of modification, reinforced plating, slight discoloration where materials had been replaced. And near the base, footprints, clear, fresh, boot prints, not his. Silas crouched, studied them, tread pattern unfamiliar, not local, not standard work boots, something else. He exhaled slowly. They're still here. Not in the tunnel, but using it. Valor suddenly stopped. Not ahead, not toward the chamber, behind. He turned sharply, body rigid, ears forward, eyes locked down the corridor they had come from. Silas followed the movement instantly, raising the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. Empty corridor. Still, then. A sound. Not from the pipes, not from above. From the tunnel itself, a faint shift, like weight moving carefully against concrete. Silas didn't speak. Valor didn't bark. The dog stepped forward slowly, positioning himself between Silas and the darkness. Protective, focused. Whatever had made that sound, it knew they were there, and it had stopped moving, waiting. Silas reached down, gripping Valor's collar lightly, not to restrain, to anchor. He kept the flashlight steady. 5 seconds, 10, nothing. The corridor remained silent, too silent. Silas exhaled. We're done here. Not retreat, not yet, but not pushing blind either. He backed away slowly, step by step. Valor moved with him, never turning his back to the darkness. When they reached the shaft, Silas climbed up first, pulling himself through the opening with controlled effort. Valor followed in a single fluid motion. They stood in the boathouse again, light, air, space, but it didn't feel safer. Silas replaced the boards loosely, not sealing them, not hiding it completely, just enough. He turned toward the house, stopped. The back door, still open, just like before. Silas didn't move right away. He studied it. The angle, the stillness, no wind, no reason for it to shift. Valor growled, low, steady. Silas walked forward, slowly, carefully. He stepped inside. Nothing looked disturbed. No signs of entry. No damage, no missing items. Everything exactly where it had been, except the hallway. Silas felt it immediately, that same pressure. He moved toward it, Valor at his side. They reached the same spot, the same place. Silas stood there, listening, waiting. Then, a sound, not loud, not sharp, but clear, from beneath, a single measured knock. Silas closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. This time, he didn't question it. The envelope was waiting on the kitchen table. Silas knew immediately it hadn't been there before. He stood just inside the doorway, boots still dusty from the boathouse, eyes scanning the room with the same slow precision he had carried through years of deployment. Nothing else had moved. The chair remained angled the same way, the cup by the sink untouched. The map Eleanor had given him still folded exactly where he left it. Only the envelope was new, plain white, no stamp, no address. Which meant whoever left it hadn't come through the front. Silas didn't reach for it right away. Behind him, Valor stepped into the room and stopped. The dog didn't go to the envelope. He didn't sniff it. He didn't circle. He looked at the back door, then at the floor, then slowly, deliberately, back to Silas, waiting. Silas crossed the room, picked up the envelope, light, single sheet inside. He opened it without hesitation. The paper was thicker than standard stock, expensive, clean, precise, the kind of detail that didn't matter unless someone wanted it to. The message was short. Mr. Creed, it would be a pleasure to meet you properly. Halcyon Reach Foundation, private reception, 7:30 p.m., dress is optional, presence is not, J. Mercer. Silas read it twice, not because he needed to, because of the tone, not a request, not quite an order, something in between. He folded the paper once, slipped it back into the envelope, then looked at Valor. Well, he muttered quietly, guess we're being watched. Valor didn't react, but he didn't relax either. The lodge sat on the far side of the lake, perched slightly above the shoreline like it had been placed there to overlook everything without being part of it. By the time Silas arrived, the sun had dipped low enough to soften the light, casting long shadows across the gravel path and turning the lake into a muted sheet of silver gray. The building itself was larger than anything else in Alder Bay, wood and glass, modern but designed to look natural, like it belonged even when it didn't. Silas parked away from the main entrance. He didn't rush, didn't adjust his clothing, didn't change anything, The same worn tactical shirt, the same boots, the same watch. He wasn't here to impress anyone. Inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Soft lighting, low voices, the quiet murmur of people who knew each other well enough not to speak loudly. Most of them looked like they belonged. Clean clothes, relaxed posture, local influence, money but not showy. The kind that stayed hidden because it didn't need to prove anything. Silas stood out instantly. He felt it in the way conversations paused just slightly when he entered, in the way eyes moved toward him, then away, measured, controlled. Valor wasn't with him. Silas had left him at the house. That decision sat heavier than expected. A man approached from across the room, mid-40s, maybe pushing 50. Tall, just under Silas's height, but with a presence that made him feel larger than he was. His build wasn't muscular, but it was composed, deliberate, like everything about him had been chosen rather than developed. Julian Mercer. His hair was dark, threaded with early gray, combed neatly without looking rigid. His face was clean-shaven, features balanced and symmetrical in a way that made it difficult to read anything beneath the surface. His eyes, deep brown, almost black in low light, held steady contact without ever appearing aggressive. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a white shirt, no tie, no visible excess. Everything about him said control. "Mr. Creed," Julian said, extending his hand. His voice was smooth, even, not warm, but not cold either. Silas looked at the hand, then shook it, firm, brief. "Didn't realize I had an appointment," Silas replied. Julian smiled slightly. "You didn't," he said, "but I assumed you would come anyway." Silas tilted his head a fraction. "Why?" Julian's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the lake, then back. "Because men like you don't ignore questions." A pause. "And because your dog heard something." Silas didn't move, didn't react, but something inside him tightened. Julian noticed. Of course he did. They stepped away from the crowd toward a quieter section near the glass wall overlooking the water. For a moment, neither spoke. Julian rested one hand lightly against the back of a chair. "You've already been inside the structure beneath your property," he said. "Not a question." Silas didn't answer. Julian continued. "It's older than it looks," he said, "built for a purpose that no longer officially exists." Silas crossed his arms. "Officially?" Julian's expression didn't change. "There are systems in this world that outlive the reasons they were created," he said. "And sometimes people continue to use them for reasons that were never intended." Silas studied him. "You always talk in circles?" Julian's smile returned. "Only when the truth isn't useful yet." Silas turned slightly, glancing out over the lake. At first it looked exactly as it had all evening, calm, uninterrupted. Then something caught his eye, far out, near the darker stretch of water where the depth dropped sharply. A ripple. Not wind, not natural. A line, moving, slowly, straight, like something cutting just beneath the surface. Silas narrowed his eyes, focused. The ripple vanished, gone as if it had never existed. He looked back at Julian. The man was already watching him, not the lake, him. And for the first time, Julian's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You see it now," Julian said quietly. Silas didn't answer. "Good," Julian continued. "That makes this conversation easier." Silas stepped closer. "What exactly are you running out there?" Julian's expression didn't harden. It didn't need to. "Not what you think," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get tonight." Silas held his gaze. Julian leaned in slightly, not aggressively, but just enough to lower his voice. "You've already made one mistake in your life," he said. Silas's jaw tightened. Julian didn't miss it. "The kind that stays with you," he continued. "The kind that doesn't go away no matter how far you drive." Silas's voice dropped. "You don't know anything about that." Julian's head tilted slightly. No? A beat. Afghanistan, he said softly. 3-man team, K9 unit attached. You hesitated. Silas's breath stopped, just for a fraction. Enough. Julian straightened again. I'm not here to threaten you, he said calmly. If I wanted that, you wouldn't have made it into town this morning. Silas didn't speak, because he knew that part was true. Julian gestured lightly toward the lake again. What's beneath your house doesn't belong to you, he said. Silas replied without hesitation. Then you shouldn't have built it there. Julian's eyes sharpened, a flicker, gone just as quickly. It wasn't built for you to understand, he said. Silas stepped closer. And Noah? That landed, not visibly, but Silas felt it. Julian's silence lasted just long enough, then, some people go looking for things they aren't equipped to find, he said. And you bury them? Julian's gaze didn't waver. We contain problems, he replied. The conversation ended there, not formally. Julian simply stepped back. As I said, he added lightly, presence was enough. Silas didn't shake his hand this time. He turned and walked out. The drive back felt different, not longer, heavier. The lake was darker now, reflecting only fragments of the sky. The trees seemed closer to the road, the silence thicker. Silas didn't turn on the radio, didn't need the distraction. Every word Julian had said replayed in his mind. Not the threats, the accuracy. That was the part that mattered. They knew, not just where he was, who he was, what he had done. When he reached the property, the first thing he noticed was the door, closed. That alone was wrong. Silas stepped out slowly. No lights inside, no sound, the kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. He approached the house, opened the door. Inside, Valor stood in the hallway, exactly where Silas had left him, but not the same. The dog's body was rigid, breathing slow, controlled, waiting. Silas stepped inside. Valor, no movement. Then, the dog turned, not toward Silas, toward the back, and ran. Silas followed instantly. Out the back door, across the clearing, toward the boathouse. Valor didn't stop there, he ran past it, toward the shoreline. Silas pushed harder, boots digging into the dirt. Valor! The dog reached the edge of the water and stopped, dead still. Silas came up beside him, breathing steady, eyes forward. The lake stretched out in front of them, dark, calm, silent. Then, a sound, clear, measured, from beneath the ground behind them. Knock. A pause. Knock. Silas didn't turn, didn't need to. He already knew what was coming. Knock. This time, there was no mistaking it. Silas exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. All right. He looked down at Valor. The dog didn't look back, still watching the water. Silas followed his gaze, and for the first time, he didn't try to explain it away. Silas didn't sleep, not after the third knock, not after what he had seen in the lake. He sat at the edge of the bed through most of the night, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The room was quiet again, too quiet, but now it felt different, not empty, measured, like something had already accounted for him. Across the room, Valor lay near the doorway. He hadn't moved much either. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled, but his eyes remained open, tracking every shift of light, every subtle change in the air. Even at rest, Valor wasn't resting. Silas understood that feeling. By dawn, he had made a decision. He wasn't leaving, but he wasn't staying blind either. The morning light came in cold and sharp, cutting through the trees in long, pale beams. The lake looked calm again, too calm, but Silas no longer trusted what it showed on the surface. Valor stood the moment Silas reached for his jacket. No command needed. The dog was already alert, already moving. All right, Silas muttered. Lead. Valor didn't hesitate. He moved past the house, past the boathouse, and this time, toward the shoreline, not the open water, a narrower stretch, partially hidden by overgrown brush and broken dock posts that looked like they had collapsed years ago and never been repaired. Silas followed closely, eyes scanning automatically. Tracks, faint, disturbed earth where it shouldn't be, not animal, boot, recent. Valor pushed through the brush, disappearing for a moment before reappearing near a low structure partially buried into the slope. Concrete, subtle, hidden intentionally. Silas slowed, approached carefully. The entrance wasn't obvious, just a recessed section of earth and stone, but once you knew what to look for, it was impossible to miss. A secondary access point, not the boathouse, something else. Backup route, Silas murmured. Valor stood beside the opening, waiting. Silas pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and stepped inside. The space was tighter than the main tunnel, lower ceiling, less reinforced, but newer. The air smelled different here, less decay, more use. Silas moved slowly, every sense tuned. The corridor bent slightly after a few steps, leading into a small chamber. Not large, but active. That was the first thing he noticed, not equipment running, but evidence of presence, a table, metal, portable, and on it, photographs, stacks of them, pinned, arranged, categorized. Silas stepped closer, his jaw tightened. Faces. People from town, men, women, workers, shop owners, even Eleanor. Different angles, different times, some candid, some clearly taken from distance, surveillance, systematic, organized. He flipped one over, date, time, location, all logged. His eyes moved faster now. Then, he saw it, Noah Wren, younger than he expected, tall, lean, with a face that looked like it had been shaped by quiet rather than conflict. His hair was light brown, kept short but not military. His expression in most of the photos was neutral, but in the later ones there was something else. Tension, awareness, the kind that came when someone realized they were being watched. Silas swallowed slowly, then his hand stopped. Another photo, him, Silas Creed, standing outside the house, taken from the tree line, first day. He stared at it, longer than necessary. "They've been tracking me since I arrived," he said quietly. Valor made a low sound. Agreement, not surprise. Silas turned, scanning the rest of the room. A metal drawer unit sat beneath the table, locked. Not heavily. He forced it open. Inside, folders, organized, labeled. He flipped through them quickly. Names, files, data, then one label stopped him. Creed, Silas. He pulled it out, opened it. The contents were clinical, structured, not emotional, which made it worse. Subject profile, Silas Creed, former Navy SEAL, K-9 unit. Attachment, confirmed behavioral. Note, subject exhibits delayed response when K-9 unit is placed under direct threat. Decision-making compromised under emotional conflict involving K-9. Historical incident confirms hesitation resulted in loss of secondary personnel. Silas's fingers tightened on the page. The room felt smaller, not physically, but mentally. They didn't just know him, they understood him, studied him, reduced him to patterns, weaknesses, variables. He flipped the page. More notes, more analysis, predictive behavior, estimated reaction windows. Silas closed the folder slowly. "They're not hiding from me," he said. "They're preparing for me." A soft sound came from behind. Not in the tunnel, closer. Silas turned instantly. Valor had already moved, standing between Silas and the entrance, body low, teeth just visible. The dog wasn't barking. He didn't need to. Someone was there. A shadow crossed the entrance, not rushing, not aggressive, just present. Then a voice, calm, familiar. "You shouldn't have come down here." Silas didn't lower his stance. Too late for that. The figure stepped into the light, Eleanor Voss. She looked older here, not physically, but exposed. Her silver hair was tied tighter than before, pulled back as if she had abandoned any attempt to appear casual. Her face, usually composed, now carried something closer to resignation. She didn't step fully into the room, didn't cross the threshold, like she knew exactly where it was safe to stand. "I told you to leave," she said. Silas didn't respond. Eleanor's eyes moved briefly to the open file in his hand, then back to him. "So you found it," she murmured. Silas stepped closer. "You worked for them." Not a question. Eleanor didn't deny it. "I worked in their archive system," she said quietly. "Records, storage, classification." Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't steady either. "I saw things I wasn't supposed to understand," she continued. "At first it was just data, reports, names, movements." She gestured faintly around the room. "Then I realized none of it was passive." Silas watched her. "They weren't storing information," she said. "They were controlling it." A pause. "And the people connected to it." Silas's voice lowered. "Noah?" Eleanor's expression shifted. Pain, not loud, but real. "He didn't die the night they said he did," she said. Silas didn't blink. "He found something," she continued. "Something they couldn't let out." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the tunnel behind Silas. They kept him alive long enough to understand how much he knew. Silas felt his jaw tighten. "And then?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Silas exhaled slowly. "They're using the lake," he said. Eleanor nodded. "For movement," she said. "For storage. For things that don't officially exist." "And the tunnels. Part of a system that was never meant to be public." Silas looked back at the photos, the files, the structure. "They're running an operation under a town that doesn't even know it." Eleanor's voice dropped. "Some of them do." Silas looked at her. "And they stay quiet." Eleanor met his gaze. "Because the ones who don't disappear." A sharp crack split the air. Gunfire, not close, but not far. Valor reacted instantly, turning, body snapping toward the exit. Another shot, closer. Silas grabbed the folder, shoving it into his jacket. "Move!" Eleanor didn't argue. She stepped back. Out of the entrance. Silas followed. Valor ahead. The moment they cleared the brush, another shot rang out. Dirt kicked up near Silas's feet. Not aimed to kill, a warning. Or something worse. Silas grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Get back to town." She pulled away. "I'm not your responsibility." "No," Silas said. "But you're still alive." A beat, then she turned and moved, fast, gone into the trees. Silas turned toward the lake, scanning, movement, two figures, positioned, hidden poorly. Amateurs? No, deliberate exposure. They wanted him to see them, to react. Another shot, this one, closer, and then a sound Silas hadn't heard in years, a sharp pained cry. He turned, Valor staggered, just slightly, then held his ground. Blood darkened the fur along his shoulder, not a clean hit, but enough. Silas froze. For half a second. That was all it took. The world narrowed, not to the threat, to the dog. Valor didn't fall, didn't retreat. He stood there, breathing heavier now, still between Silas and the shooters, still ready. Silas's grip tightened. Rifle. No, he hadn't brought it. His hand clenched into nothing. Another shot cracked past, closer. Silas's mind split. Two paths, clear, immediate. Go forward, end it, or fall back. Save the one thing he had left. Valor looked back, just once, not in fear, not in pain, but in expectation, trust. Silas inhaled sharply, and for the first time since arriving, he hesitated. The gunshot still echoed in Silas's ears long after the sound itself had faded. Everything slowed, not the world, just him. Valor stood a few feet ahead, body angled protectively, breath heavier now, the dark stain spreading across his shoulder unmistakable against his black and gold coat. The dog didn't collapse, didn't retreat. He held his ground, just like before, and that was the problem, because Silas had seen this moment once already, years ago. Different place, different mission, same choice. Another shot cracked through the trees, closer. The air snapped with it. Silas moved, not forward, not yet. He dropped low, grabbing Valor by the collar, pulling him down just enough to shift their profile against the terrain. "Easy," he muttered. But Valor resisted, not violently, deliberately. The dog twisted, pushing against Silas's grip, not to escape, to redirect, toward the brush, toward the slope, toward the hidden entrance they had just come from. Silas frowned. "No," he said quietly. "We fall back." Valor didn't obey. The dog planted his paws, muscles tense, then pulled again, harder this time, his head turning sharply toward the concealed opening beneath the earth. Silas froze. Because it wasn't panic, it wasn't confusion, it was intent. Valor wasn't trying to retreat, he was choosing a direction. Another shot, closer still. A branch snapped overhead. Silas's instincts screamed at him, cover, distance, reposition. But Valor pulled again, stronger, more urgent. Silas looked at him, really looked. Not at the wound, not at the blood, at the eyes, focused, clear, certain. And suddenly, Silas understood. This wasn't fear, this wasn't survival, this was purpose. He exhaled sharply. "All right," he said. Not to the shooters, to the dog. "I'm with you." They moved, fast, not away from the threat, through it. Silas used the terrain, shifting angles, cutting low through brush while Valor led the line, not recklessly but precisely, guiding them back toward the hidden entry point. Another shot rang out, this one close enough to feel, dirt kicked near Silas's leg. They were adjusting, tracking, learning. Silas didn't stop. They reached the entrance, dropped inside. Darkness swallowed them instantly. The tunnel felt different this time. Not empty, not silent, pressurized, like something was about to change. Silas didn't slow. Valor didn't hesitate. They moved deeper, past the chamber with the surveillance photos, past the compartment, further, to where the structure narrowed again, then widened, into something Silas hadn't seen before, a deeper section, hidden beyond a partial collapse that had been cleared just enough for passage. This wasn't on the main path, Silas murmured. Valor kept moving. The chamber beyond was larger, more structured, more active. This wasn't an abandoned section. This was where things happened. Steel racks lined one wall, empty now but recently used. Faint scuff marks suggested heavy containers had been moved in and out repeatedly. On the opposite side, a mounted terminal, old but functional, wired into something deeper. Silas approached, powered it on. The screen flickered, then stabilized. Files, directories, encrypted labels, but one stood out, a video file, time-stamped, 11 years ago. Silas clicked it. The image was shaky at first, then stabilized. A man appeared on screen, Noah Wren, not the version from the photos. This one was different, unshaven, exhausted, eyes sharp with something closer to urgency than fear. He sat in the same room Silas stood in now, the same angle, same background. "This is Noah Wren," he said. His voice was steady, too steady. "If anyone finds this, you're already inside the system." He glanced off-camera briefly, listening, then continued. "They're not just moving equipment." He leaned closer. "They're moving records, data, people." Silas felt his chest tighten. Noah swallowed. "I saw him," he said. A pause. "Julian Mercer." The name hung in the air. Silas didn't move. Noah continued. "He's not just running the Foundation." Another glance. Closer this time. "They built this network to disappear things." Silas's jaw tightened. Noah leaned back slightly. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it out." A breath. "And it means they know." The video flickered, Then, cut. Silas stood there for a long moment, processing, not emotionally, structurally, the pieces, the system, the pattern. They're not just hiding operations, he said quietly. They're controlling exits. Valor made a low sound. Agreement. Then Silas saw it. Another device, different from the recorder, larger, mounted to the wall. He stepped closer, ran his fingers along it. Old military design, acoustic transmission unit, low frequency, subsurface capable. Silas's eyes sharpened. They weren't just using this for movement, he said. They were using it to send signals. Valor stepped closer, watching. Silas activated the device. The machine hummed softly. A low vibration filled the room, not loud but deep. He adjusted the frequency manually, listening, waiting. Then, a response, not from the device, from outside, faint, distant, but real, a return signal, somewhere beyond the lake. Silas's eyes widened slightly. They're still monitoring this channel. Valor's ears lifted. The dog turned toward the deeper tunnel, not reacting to the sound, to something else, something moving, fast, coming toward them. Silas shut the device off immediately. Too late, he already knew. They know we're here. A heavy metallic sound echoed through the tunnel behind them. A door. Ceiling. Silas turned. The passage they came through, gone. A reinforced barrier had dropped into place, blocking the exit. Of course, he muttered. Containment, not elimination, yet. A second sound followed. Different, lower. A rush. Silas froze, listened, then understood. Water, moving, fast. Get up, he said. Valor was already moving. The lower section of the tunnel began to flood, not instantly but steadily. Water poured in from concealed inlets along the walls, rising faster than natural seepage. Engineered, controlled. Silas grabbed the file drive from the terminal, shoving it into his pocket. Move! They ran. Deeper wasn't an option. Back wasn't possible. Only one direction remained. Up, if there was an exit. The water reached their boots. Cold, fast, rising. Valor limped, but didn't slow. The dog's breathing was heavier now, but his movement remained precise, focused. Silas scanned the walls as they ran, looking for anything. Then, Valor veered sharply. Toward a narrow vertical shaft partially hidden behind a support beam, Silas followed. Show me! The dog jumped, clawed upward, scrambling against the wall, not random, targeted. Silas saw it, a grate, old, rusting, ventilation. He reached up, grabbed it, pulled. It resisted. Water reached his knees. Come on! He pulled harder. The metal snapped loose. Air rushed through the opening. Cold, clean, real. Silas boosted Valor first. The dog struggled for a moment, then found footing, pulled himself up, turned, looked down, waiting. Silas climbed next. Water surged behind him. He pushed through the shaft, emerging into forest. Not far from the shoreline, hidden, forgotten. They collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard, alive, for now. Silas rolled onto his back, staring up through the trees, then turned his head. Valor lay beside him, chest rising, wound still bleeding but controlled, eyes open, watching him. Silas reached out, rested a hand against the dog's neck. His voice was quiet, not steady, but real. This time, he paused, swallowed. I listened. Valor didn't move, didn't need to. The forest was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet Silas had grown used to over the past few days. The measured stillness, the waiting silence, but something else, final, resolved. He stood just beyond the tree line, one hand resting lightly against Valor's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing beneath his palm. The wound on Valor's shoulder had been cleaned as best as Silas could manage in the field, wrapped tight, bleeding slowed but not fully under control. Still the dog stood, still watched, still listened. Silas followed his gaze, back toward the property, smoke, thin at first, then thicker, rising. They're cleaning it, Silas said quietly. Valor didn't react. He didn't need to. Silas exhaled slowly. Julian Mercer wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was erasing. They moved, not rushing, not blindly. Silas kept to the trees, circling wide instead of heading straight back. Years of training guided every step. Angles, elevation, lines of sight. He wasn't thinking about it consciously anymore. He didn't need to. Valor stayed close, his movement tighter now, more controlled. The injury had changed his stride, but not his focus. If anything, the dog seemed sharper, more locked in than before. They reached the ridge overlooking the property just as the fire began to take. The house was already burning. Flames crawled along the wood, feeding fast, pushing upward with the dry precision of something set intentionally. The boathouse caught next, fire licking across its aging structure as if it had been waiting for the chance. Silas crouched low, watching. 3 vehicles, dark, unmarked, positioned deliberately. Men moved around them, not panicked, not hurried, efficient. This wasn't chaos. It was procedure. One of the men stepped into clearer view, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, lighter at the temples. His face was hard, not from anger, but from repetition, the kind of man who had done this enough times that it no longer required thought. Evan Rourke. Silas didn't know his name yet, but he knew the type. Former military, most likely, private sector now. The kind of operator who traded ideology for contracts long ago. Rourke gestured once. Another man moved forward with a canister. Accelerant, systematic, clean. Silas's jaw tightened. "They're not leaving anything," he murmured. Valor's ears shifted slightly, not toward the fire, toward the road. Silas followed the movement. Headlights, multiple, approaching fast. Not the same vehicles, different pattern, different spacing, official. The first siren cut through the trees, sharp, unmistakable. Then another, and another. Red and blue lights broke through the forest edge, flashing across the smoke, reflecting off the rising flames. The men below froze, not in panic, in calculation. Rourke turned first. His posture shifted, not fear but recognition. This wasn't unexpected, but it wasn't controlled anymore. Silas narrowed his eyes. They didn't expect it this soon. Valor let out a low breath, the kind that came just before movement. Federal vehicles broke into the clearing, fast, precise. Doors opened before the engines fully stopped. Agents stepped out in coordinated lines, dark jackets, weapons drawn but controlled, voices cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The words carried, clear, final. Rourke didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon either. He simply stood there watching the perimeter close in. Then, slowly, he raised his hands. The others followed, one by one. The fire crackled louder behind them, but it didn't matter anymore. Silas stayed where he was, watching, waiting. He didn't step out, not yet. He'd seen too many operations collapse at the edges to assume this one was finished. Valor shifted slightly beside him. Not toward the agents, toward something else. Movement. Behind the burning structure. Silas's eyes snapped to it. A figure. Not one of the men being detained, not part of the response team, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight, still watching. Julian Mercer. He wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't moving at all. Just standing there, hands in his coat pockets, expression unreadable even from a distance. Like a man observing something he had already accepted. Silas felt it. That same controlled presence, that same absence of urgency. Then Julian's gaze shifted, not toward the agents, toward the ridge, toward Silas. For a moment, they locked eyes, across distance, across fire, across everything that had just happened. Julian didn't smile, didn't speak, but something passed between them, recognition, then he stepped forward, into the open, hands visible, surrendering. The agents moved quickly after that, commands, restraints, control. Within minutes, the clearing was secured. The fire continued to burn, but now it was contained, monitored, irrelevant to the outcome. Silas finally stood, exhaled. "All right," he muttered. Valor looked up at him, waiting. Silas nodded once. "Let's go." They stepped out of the trees slowly, not rushed, not cautious, just present. An agent turned immediately, weapon raising slightly before lowering again at the sight of them. "Hold," the agent called. Another approached. Mid-30s, lean build, sharp features, focused eyes that moved quickly, processing everything at once. Agent Daniel Hayes. His dark hair was cut short, practical. His face carried the kind of fatigue that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of seeing things that didn't resolve cleanly. He stopped a few feet from Silas. "You Creed?" he asked. Silas nodded once. "Yeah." Hayes's eyes moved briefly to Valor, to the blood, to the stance. "Dog needs medical," he said immediately, turning slightly. "We've got a unit inbound." "He's fine," Silas said. Hayes didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He looked back at Silas. "You sent the signal?" Silas nodded again. Hayes exhaled. "Good call," he said. "Coastline picked it up faster than expected." Silas glanced toward the burning structure. "They were trying to wipe everything." Hayes followed his gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We've been tracking Halcyon for years, just never had enough to move." He looked back at Silas. "Until now." Behind them, agents moved through the area, securing equipment, documenting evidence, controlling what remained. Eleanor stood near one of the vehicles, not restrained, not guarded, just standing, watching everything unfold. Her posture had changed, not lighter but freer, like a weight she had carried for too long had finally been set down. Silas walked toward her. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him, then at Valor. "He stayed," she said quietly. Silas nodded. "So did you." Eleanor gave a faint smile, the first real one he had seen. The fire burned down slowly, not violently, just enough to erase what had been there, but not enough to matter anymore, because the truth was already out. Hours passed, then more. By the time the sun began to rise again, the clearing had changed completely. Vehicles gone, agents reduced. Only a few remained, the rest handled, contained, finished. Silas stood at the edge of the property. Valor lay beside him now, resting properly for the first time, though his ears still twitched occasionally at distant sounds. The bandage had been replaced. Clean, professional, the dog would heal, slowly, but he would... Silas looked out over the lake. The surface calm again, unbroken, but different, because now he knew what was beneath it, and he wasn't afraid of it. Agent Hayes approached once more. "Mercer's in custody," he said. Silas nodded. "The network?" "Collapsed," Hayes replied. "What we didn't shut down, we will." A pause. "You planning to stick around?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Valor, at the scar that would remain, then back at the lake. "Yeah," he said finally. Hayes studied him. "Most people wouldn't." Silas gave a faint, almost absent smile. "I'm not most people." Weeks passed, then months. The property didn't stay empty. It changed, rebuilt, not into what it had been, into something else. A place for recovery, for training, for dogs that worked, and people who needed something to work for. Valor healed. The scar remained, a thin line across his shoulder visible beneath the fur when the light hit it just right. Silas carried his own, not visible, but just as real. Early summer returned. The air warmed, the trees filled out again, and the lake stayed quiet most of the time. Silas stood on the new dock one evening, watching the water shift gently beneath the wind. Valor stood beside him, still listening. The breeze moved across the surface, soft, consistent, and then a sound, faint, familiar, wood against tension, structure responding to pressure, a subtle rhythm. Silas didn't react, didn't dismiss it, didn't question it. Valor lifted his head slightly, ears forward, listening. Silas looked down at him, then back at the water, and for the first time, he didn't pull the dog away. Sometimes the things we fear are not meant to harm us, but to guide us. Silas spent years running from a mistake that haunted him the moment he didn't trust the instinct of a loyal companion. That one decision stayed with him, shaping every step he took afterward. But in the end, it wasn't strength or skill that changed his path. It was the choice to listen, the choice to trust again. In our lives, we all face moments like that. Moments when something inside us, quiet, persistent, almost easy to ignore, tries to warn us, guide us, or call us back to what truly matters. Some call it instinct, some call it conscience, and some believe it is God speaking in ways we don't always understand. Maybe the knock in your life isn't something to run from. Maybe it's something calling you toward truth, toward courage, toward healing. Silas didn't find peace by escaping his past. He found it by facing it, with faith, with trust, and with the willingness to change. And sometimes God doesn't send answers in obvious ways. Sometimes He sends them through the people and companions beside us, even through a loyal dog who never stops believing in us. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on what you might be ignoring in your own life. What is trying to get your attention? What are you being called to face? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone, and your voice matters. If you believe that loyalty, faith, and second chances can change a life, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, stories about courage, redemption, and the quiet ways God works in our lives, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God watch over you, guide your path, and give you the strength to listen when it matters most.